So when you emailed me and said that you wanted me to come in and talk about that core wound of worthlessness, I thought, like, where do you start? It's like foundational to the Western modern consumerist sort of ego structure. It's foundational. I mean, it comes at the very beginning often for most of us in life, and so we think of it as characterological. We think of it as who we are, but it's memory.
Welcome to Are We Happy Yet? Where we're all about having the tough, thought-provoking conversations about what it really takes to live a fulfilling life, without buying into the latest wellness trends, miracle cures, or life hacks.
If you're someone who's curious and likes to dig beneath the surface, join us. We're here to explore why, despite having access to more information and technology than ever, studies show that global unhappiness is at a record high.
This question kept nagging at us. Why are so many of us feeling more anxious, disconnected, and lonely than ever before?
I'm Hannah Buzzo, licensed therapist.
And I'm Jane Thatcher Hahn, licensed clinical social worker.
Together, we'll challenge the quick fix advice culture and dive into the big questions about happiness, success, and well-being.
In each episode, we'll share candid conversations and personal stories, unpacking the cultural narratives that shape how we live, love, and work. No solutions, no formulas. Just honest, thought-provoking dialogue that invites you to think differently about the world around you and your place within it.
So whether you're feeling overwhelmed by the pressure to have it all figured out, or simply curious about what lies beyond the mainstream wellness conversation, you're in the right place.
Welcome to the club. You're not alone in wondering what will finally, truly make us happy.
I'm really excited about this episode today. One thing that has come up throughout the podcast interviews that we've done so far, Jane, and also when we've talked about our clinical work as therapists, is this underlying wound of feeling inadequate or unworthy, not good enough. Like we all seem to have it. And it's something that I've been really curious about, and we've been curious about, and we've talked to a lot of people on the podcast who have navigated that in different ways. And so we wanted to do a podcast episode about it. And when I was thinking about who to interview, the first person that came to our mind is our lovely guest, Jen Fiser, who is the lead trainer and owner of Innate Path, which is a psychedelic training organization that I went through. And also some of our previous podcast guests went through too. And she taught me a lot about this. We talked a lot about it in the training on how to use different therapeutic modalities, how it presents for people. And so she was kind of the first person that I thought of that would just be the rock star to talk about this unworthiness wound. So she's joining us, which I'm so excited. Thank you, Jen, for doing this. It's been the third time's the charm because I got sick the first time. Jen got sick the second time. So we're ready. We're really coming in hot today with this. So Jen, maybe introduce yourself a little bit more and then we can just rock and roll.
Okay. I'm super happy to be here. And my name is Jen Fiser. I am a therapist, and I also am the owner of Innate Path. We started out as a clinic, and we specialized in working with PTSD, with ketamine and cannabis-assisted therapy. And, and the idea at the clinic was that we would be a community of therapists, and I would train everybody and supervise, and we would start deepening our understanding of what you could do with psychedelics. We had a model going in that was basically about working with trauma and how to, resolve the triggers and the memories that were being triggered from trauma using psychedelics. But then after COVID, because our stuff is very hands-on, we shifted into just becoming a training organization and working with practitioners locally and trying to form a community of people who were doing this work and learning more because, basically psychedelics allow you to go inward. And once you start going inward, it's a vast terrain, and it's a beautiful and intricate terrain, but there's just so much to learn. So we've been doing this since 2018. And, you know, if you're working with PTSD, especially complex PTSD, but any PTSD, you're going to be working with negative self feelings. You know, so when you emailed me and said that you wanted me to come in and talk about that core wound of worthlessness, I thought, like, where do you start? It's like foundational to the Western modern consumerist sort of ego structure. It's foundational. I mean, it comes at the very beginning often for most of us in life, and so we think of it as characterological. We think of it as who we are, but it's memory, and it's experience that shapes our belief systems that we just kind of build a life around. So the topic is vast and really important. And so you mentioned that you had been running into this as you were talking through the podcast so far, and so I'm curious what you've been running into, and maybe if you want to steer me.
Yeah, I guess, and Jane, you jump in here, but a lot of the conversations that we've had so far on this podcast has been around, I was taught, sold, programmed that there was this way in which I could build a happy, meaningful life, right? For some people that we've had on, it was being a lawyer. For other people, it was moving to New York City and like doing a marketing career. For other people we've had, it's been having kids, right? Whatever the thing is. But the through line that we've seen on the podcast so far is like, of course, that doesn't scratch the itch, right? And so then people are going through, I can never get it right, dark night of the soul night of the dark, whatever. Okay, dark night of the soul. Right. And realizing, oh, I'm trying to feel adequate by my marriage, by my career, by the money that I make, by the trips that I go on. And it's this deep wound that, I mean, it's been kind of a highlighted of this inadequacy, this feeling not enough. And my question is, I mean, I can't think of another belief that like we all have, right? Like it's so core to the humanness, at least in like American Western culture. And so I'm just so curious about like, why is it so universal?
Yeah, like it's there for people who don't even haven't even experienced trauma, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Like they have fairly stable, healthy childhoods, and they still feel this way. Yeah. And I was thinking as you were talking, like what I hear a lot from people is they feel like they have an imposter syndrome, which is really common as well, along the same lines. Yeah. Just no, I got a ton to say.
Oh, great.
We could just go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah. But I think it's good. It's good to name it, and it's good to, and wherever you want to start is great. But I just think, as you are both talking and saying, okay, this is core or whatever to the Western structure, my clients are still surprised every time. They're like, oh my God, I do have a worthiness wound, you know, and some of them come in and know that, but some of them, I'll tell them, I think this has to do with this kind of self-worth piece or this.
Well, it's like a fish in water. You don't perceive it.
That's exactly it. You don't perceive it, and nobody names it. And if somebody doesn't start talking about it or naming it for you, you know, they'll come back to me months later and say, oh my God, you were right. It didn't make sense when you first said it, right? But now it's making sense. And the pervasiveness of it. And are you seeing or feeling that like Eastern cultures or outside of America that there's less of that sort of core foundational wound?
Yeah.
What do you notice?
I mean, who knows nowadays, but I think well, I remember reading the story when I did a master's program in contemplative Buddhist psychology, and I remember the story about these meditation masters who were felt called. You know, it was like their destiny. They were called to come to the West, and what they said was it was time. You know, and this is where we see that wave in the 60s of and 70s of these meditation masters coming and starting communities in the West. Naropa, the school that I went to, was one of those communities, the Shambhala community. And one of the things that they were, that had been said in a variety of different ways by these people was that they were shocked when they got to know the Western people because they hated themselves. Like they couldn't imagine why a human being would hate themselves.
So, go ahead.
So, you know, I think there's something there. And then, you know, if you're talking about other cultures, like let's say cultures that are more tribal, even indigenous, you're talking about people that have strong bonds to their community and to their families. And I think that's part of it too. So you've got these, you know, meditation masters from the East who, what is meditation? It's going within. They know that when you go within, you find peace and you find compassion naturally arising from it. So it's weird to see a human being that doesn't have those things. And people that come from strong communities with strong families, they are bonded to each other. That bond is no small thing. It is like, it's a bond. It's like to death. You know, you love each other no matter what. You stick up for each other no matter what. You know that your community has your back, and you can be whoever you are, and someone has your back. So there is another piece to the puzzle. Like in the Western world, most of us feel like our families and may not, and even our communities, and our communities for sure don't have our back when we behave authentically. So that's life threatening.
So where does it start? Like, what is it from a young age, wanting to conform with the group, the family, the school? Like, what is it that we start to lose ourselves or start to hate ourselves in order to fit in with the group? What have you seen in the work that you've done?
So I have worked with people with severe childhood abuse and people with minor traumas in childhood as well. Across the board, there's some foundational things that happen to us that begin a cascade of experiences that form our beliefs. You know, and as human beings, we're children for a very long time, relatively speaking, to other beings that on the planet. And there's a reason for that. It's because we're so complex. I mean, we're just exquisite beings, and and to become adults, we have to go through a lot of learning to do that. And so it's like we can't just rely on our instinct that often is passed down genetically. We have to learn a lot, and that learning has to come through experience. So as we're developmentally, going through that long dependency, that long vulnerability that completely relies on the adults in our lives to protect us while it's happening.
Yeah.
While that's all happening, we're forming our beliefs about ourselves and the world, and um, and who you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to do. So when we're talking about, I know it's so big. It's such a big topic.
Yeah. I just love watching your brain
holy
work.
shit.
Yeah.
But okay. So talking about authenticity, talking about what is authenticity? It's the expression of oneself without without having to filter, right? It's like being yourself, feeling congruent inside and out. And that takes valuing yourself.
Yeah.
And it takes feeling safe in your community and in your family. And it takes being honored for your uniqueness.
Yeah.
And we're all different. And that's one thing that I see, when you start using psychedelics, and you quickly start to realize that every single person, though there are like ways in which you can address a subconscious, everybody's is different, intensely different. It's like a fingerprint. And so if that's not honored and protected, we lose touch with it. We lose touch with our own selves. That's a big part of it. And it starts, I would say, at least at the moment of birth.
How?
So the birth process, I came across this really great metaphor the other day. A animal that is born from an egg. If the egg is cracked from the outside, they die. If it's cracked from the inside, they live. And that's true even if you aren't born in an egg. Like born from a human womb, we know that the baby releases the chemicals that start the birth process. They signal when they're ready. They crack the shell from the inside. There's one thing that can go wrong. And that's your birthright. That's your agency. That's what you expect to get to do. So if that's thwarted, you're having an experience of having your agency overridden. Not that it can't be healed. That's just the experience you're having. If you have more experiences like that, even on a very pre-verbal, very non, just right brain level, you're starting to shape a belief system that your will be overpowered. Your agency isn't the force of the universe, and maybe you'll start to think, why? Like, what's wrong with me? And that's kind of like the beginning of it.
Yeah, I love the word you used, cascade, because or building, right? Like it's almost you're building a story, you're building a world, you're building an inner narrative, and those early experiences can be so profound and so informative.
Yeah, they're like forks in the road.
Yeah, exactly. And so when my clients are like, I'm so tired of talking about this, I don't want to talk about my mom or my childhood or my birth story or my, unfortunately, a lot of times those are the places, unfortunately, however you want to think about it, those are the places we have to go to look at, to heal, to work with.
Yeah, and they're often some of the most painful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the most dissociated.
Can you expand for people who don't really know what you mean by that, dissociated?
Yeah, so basically when we're threatened, we have an active threat response. And then if the threat is bigger than us and we're being overpowered, we instinctively, with beyond our control, go into a passive threat response, which is basically dissociation. I mean, that's it. It's dissociation, but it's nuanced. It's on the level of body, mind, spirit, relationship. It's on all the levels. Um, and basically what dissociation means is I'm having an experience that's overwhelming and I can't feel it all. I can't be present with it all. So to the degree I cannot be present with it, I separate myself from that experience long enough to get to safety, if I do get to safety, because often in the wild that means you're gonna die.
Yeah.
But with humanity it doesn't, because we have these experiences all the time in our extended childhood. That's not something animals tend to have. And so you're taking a part of your experience that you and pushing it away temporarily until you get to a safe place, and then you have the experience. So for example, you fall on your bike when you're 4 and you are bleeding and you run to your mom and you don't even really feel it until she's holding you, and then you just cry and you release that part of the experience that was overwhelming you in the moment. I mean, that's just natural. That's actually Peter Levine's best contribution to the field, I think, is just recognizing that we do, after threat, shake it off in the bushes. And when the threat is overwhelming, we have to bring it back into association. I mean, in both ways we do. We split from the experience.
So how does that show up with the bike example, right? So like you fall on your bike, you get hurt, you go towards mom. Like what happens when mom isn't there or like isn't responsive or like...
Right. That's exactly the biggest factor in our symptoms as adults, is that when you're talking about PTSD, you're talking about not being able to find that safe place to release it. So you just hold it. You hold it and you hold it and you hold it. And often this is where it turns into like really compartmentalized parts. It turns into flashbacks. It turns into chronic depression and anxiety. And depending on how severe the memories are, it can turn into like completely compartmentalized parts that have a feeling of I all on their own, and that's what we call dissociative identity disorder.
I haven't done the training, the psychedelic assisted therapy training yet, but I do quite a bit of EMDR and parts work, and the words congruent, which you used earlier, congruent or integrated, are big. And I think that gets confusing for people sometimes when they're like, what are you talking about? Like a human needs to be integrated or a human needs to be congruent. And that's what you're saying is these parts are splintering off because of the trauma, because they're not able to be in it, or they don't get the resolve, right? Or the completion of the trauma response. And so they're splintering off and becoming parts or triggers. Everybody loves to use the word trigger and all of the, so that kind of sounds like what you're talking about.
Yeah. And what I think is amazing is that, it's like the wholeness of our consciousness starts splitting off. But it longs to be back. It's trying to get back all the time. As soon as you get a safe place, it comes back. This can be very uncomfortable, like once in mom's arms, you get to cry, but when it's something that is chronically relational, let's say, and this is something to think about for everybody. It's a tough one, but it's like, when we're at work and we're performing whatever our duty is at work, we're not safe. We're not somewhere where we can just cry and break down or feel our feelings or anything. We're working, and that's appropriate. But then we start to go home, and we're like, we get in the car and we start driving home. And as we're driving home, we start to feel more and more anxious because we're driving to safety, not because we're driving to threat. Yeah. And this is one of the mistakes we make a lot in our relationships, is that those safe places, because what they bring up for us is painful, because they are allowing those aspects of ourselves to be felt, they start feeling like that those safe places are dangerous. And leads us on all kinds of wild goose chases trying to fix it.
So what you're saying is, in adulthood, that would look like, okay, so the bike example, mom's arms, you cry and you're okay, whatever. Then in adulthood, you're driving home, things are getting activated, and that's when, like, we are triggered by our partner or triggered by our kid or whatever. And it's not because it's a threat, it's because it's safe and things are coming up to be processed. Is that accurate?
Exactly.
Well, and that's interesting. When you work with kids, you see that a lot too. Like, they're, great at school, I'm putting quotation marks, and then their parents will say they're horrible at home, right? Or they're behave one way with one parent and another way with another parent. I think that's similar. There's a safe, often when you feel safe is when you can act out or respond to the anxiety, or and adults do that. And also, I'm just thinking, as you were talking about that, I'm thinking people driving home and then finding ways to continue the dissociation because it's too uncomfortable, right? Like,
stop at the liquor store.
Stop at the liquor store, or get in a fight, or
that's why people want to stay at work all the time. Or like you were talking about, people saying that they're, they thought they were going to find happiness in a career. Well, why wouldn't they feel that way? Because it's when you're achieving in those systemic places that you feel the least amount of upset.
So that's a starting point too, is like in school, right? Like when you do well, you get praise and acceptance and a star on the wall. I don't know, I don't have kids, but that's where it starts from a young age. It's like approval when you're doing well, approval when you're I mean, tell us, is that
I mean, you start school, if you think about school, it's very regimented. And if you deviate, your worth starts to get stripped. And, so it's the kids that conform the best that get the all the creds, but then their self-worth gets tied to conforming. And they just keep that up all the way through their adult lives. And what we do is we end up setting people up for that that, what did I call it earlier?
Imposter syndrome.
Syndrome. So you followed all the rules. You've gotten a position of authority. Now you get to enforce the rules. So it's like, now you're a gatekeeper. But you don't even know who you are. You're not tapped into your own inner compass. Your compass is given to you And so it can get really scary. People have a really hard time, like, speaking out and, you know, being creative in the academic realm and in the realms of expertise. So, you know, that's rough. But then you've got the kids who maybe they had a pretty um they had a pretty great childhood till they got to school.
Yeah.
And they thought that they got to be themselves, but pretty soon they find out that they don't get to do that. You know, I don't care if you're not hungry, you have to eat at 10:30. I don't care, you know, if you if it was an emergency, you have to raise your hand and get a hall pass. I don't care if you were excited about something, you can't talk to the person sitting next to you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. And that's the overriding the autonomy that you were talking about that starts from very young.
Yeah.
And now that you're talking about this, I mean, I can imagine too, right? Like, okay, the ones that conform are the ones that are labeled good, but they're also the ones that are like conforming and not creative or in their own expression. And then the ones who are labeled bad, like I'm sure that contributes to our beliefs around I'm inadequate, I'm bad, I'm not good enough, that type of thing.
Right. So you're taking the creative people who may be very much in touch with themselves and you know, putting the boot to their neck.
Yeah.
And just hearing, you know, from birth and possibly before to adulthood, there's so many places where this can happen, right? There's so many places where your autonomy can be overridden, and there's so many places where you can, you know, your caretakers, your teachers can fall short for you. And we've all had those experiences. We were all raised by imperfect people. So when you become an adult, like, how do you keep from despairing and saying, well, I didn't get everything I needed, you know, in my childhood. And how do you get like the empathy and compassion and care you need for yourself, and also then say, okay, how am I going to now work with this trauma or these compartmentalized parts?
Yeah. I mean, that's what our training's all about. It's it's like it's programmed into us in childhood. You know, we're conditioned, and we form our beliefs, and we and then we play them out as young adults, and they often don't work because they cause a lot of conflict in our relationships, and so then, you know, usually we try to figure out what's wrong and try to do something about it. And that's why we have, you know, these billion-dollar industries of self-help and therapy and
advice culture and all of that.
And, you know, and kind of like the trying to use social media to figure out what, you know, who you could be, what you're doing wrong. I mean, that's pretty much one of the things that everybody's asking themselves on. What am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? And so basically all this stuff is below the level of awareness. It's encoded into your subconscious programming so that you can be a human. Humans are so complicated. We can't consciously be aware of everything we're doing. That's why we were children for so long. We have so much that has to be on board unconsciously. And so we're usually not aware of these wounds. And like we were talking about earlier, we don't even feel them. We don't, because they're dissociated. They're below at the level of our awareness, and we have a system that is constructed to protect us. But what it does is it keeps those things below our awareness. And it's like we almost have like an internal war between the things that want to come up into our awareness and the things that we are not going to allow to come up into our awareness. And so that sets us up for internal conflict,
Mm.
and it sets us up for relational conflict, because not only are you acting out the scripts that you have encoded, but you're also rejecting aspects of yourself.
Mm.
But we are whole, and that is compelling, as a universal principle. It's compelling. Our wholeness is compelling, and we have to relate to ourselves. So if there's a part of us that we're rejecting, we simply put it on someone else so that we can relate to it.
Can you give an example of that?
Yeah, many.
Yeah.
An example of that would be, for example, let's say I felt like my dad was really mean and scary, and so I reject that in myself. That's one way of dealing with
Yeah.
it. One way of dealing with it. I reject that, and so I cannot be mean.
Yeah.
And so I still need to relate to the aggression I feel.
Yeah.
And so I just let other people be mean.
Yeah.
And I relate to it.
Yeah.
And it's very intelligent. It's brilliant way of dealing with having part of yourself not available to you. But like in that instance, that's the kind of thing where we need to bring back in our own aggressive feelings and feel them, so that we can allow ourselves to be mean. Because if you can't be mean, you can't protect yourself.
Hi, Hannah here, interrupting this amazing episode with a quick announcement. I'm so excited to be facilitating a robust, impactful couples psychedelic therapy retreat this March 13th through 16th in the mountains of beautiful Colorado. Join us for an intentional long weekend that includes therapist-led workshops, refreshing downtime in a beautiful home, guided private couples psychedelic sessions, and larger group psychedelic journeys using various psychedelic medicines, and more. If one of your goals this year is to deepen your relationship, reconnect with your partner, or invite new passion and intimacy into your partnership, this retreat is for you. Check the show notes out for more information about the retreat.
We need to find our way back to ourselves. And the good news is that we're back there calling ourselves. What's that quote? I think it might be a Rumi quote where it's like, what you seek is seeking you.
Yeah.
That is the truth.
Yeah.
It's like, so this is why psychedelics as a therapeutic support are can really do miraculous things in how they support us, because what they do is they like the mechanism of action, it's something along the lines of you go into a lucid dream state. And you're going into that right brain aspect of your being that is metaphorical and imaginal and emotional and relational. And by that I mean connecting the dots. It's not a logical A plus B equals C thing, but more of a, this feels like that and this sounds like that. And, it's that relational map. And you're going into that space in your brain, and, it's also timeless. So we don't work with linear time in our dream space, in our, imaginal space. We it's all timeless, and so it could be, you could go into a memory of when you were 2, and you could, or you could go, and it can relate to another memory when you're 5, and another memory when you're 10, and then another memory when you're 40, and it's like it's all kind of connected. And so when we use psychedelics, we don't have to. This is our nature. This just helps because we're so dissociated and we're so defended that we need like a extra great big hug, you know, and it may not feel like a hug because what comes up is, you know, scary or sad or something like that, but it's a hug. And it's like, it's helping us just be with our experience in the present moment. And the subconscious, that all of those parts of you that feel fragmented and aren't part of the whole will just start to come in. Because they're meant to come in. And that's their healing. That's how they heal. And you don't have to do anything. You just need to create a safe space, but you also need to understand the terrain, or you will try to shut it down. Because we misunderstand ourselves so deeply right now. And so as a therapist, you know, or as a guide, somebody that's holding space for another person, it's really important that they understand what's going on so that they can support properly. And they, you know, it's like, you don't have to do the work as the therapist. You just have to support the work.
And this reminds me, and tell me if I'm wrong, Jen, but a lot in the training around like, this is resolving the symptoms rather than reducing them. This is like, this process is disruptive and we want it to be, right? Like shit's got to come up and it's got to express, just like the anger example. I've got to be mean and angry. Like that's the healing. But most of us, and I think in a lot of traditional Western healing medicine, like, no. Like we avoid that, right? We push that away. We don't want that.
Well, it was amazing when we opened the clinic. I did all the consultations of people that wanted to come and be clients at the clinic. I just did a 1-hour consultation with everybody, and basically I just sat down and talked to them about, you know, what was going on for them, what they needed, what the history was, right?
Yeah.
And what I found over and over and over and over and over again was that people were told when they went into therapy that, you know, oh, they had suppressed anger, which is rage. It's not anger. And that they just needed to express it. But every time that therapeutic relationship became safe enough for it to come to the surface, because you can't force this stuff.
Yeah.
It has to emerge when it's ready. They would get fired from therapy.
Yeah.
And it's like, they're like, oh my God, I just spent like $30,000, got to this point where I felt safe enough to express this.
Yeah.
And the therapist became afraid of me and said that they couldn't work with me anymore.
Yeah.
You know, and I get it. Rage is intense. But there is a way to work with it safely. And we just don't know that.
Yeah.
You know, all we see is a world trying to suppress and act out, you know.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to go down that way.
When you talk about the terrain, are you talking about the terrain of working with the medicines, the psychedelics, or our inner terrain, or
yes,
like what are we? Okay, both. And what you see is that sometimes people use these and are sort of unfamiliar, or don't know what to expect, or don't know how to hold the space that would bring the most healing.
Right, like people hold the space, but they're using the mind of the Western, you know, like, you know, they're just thinking about, they're going for good experiences.
Totally.
They're trying to get away from dissociative experiences. They're trying to control the session because their conscious mind thinks it's smarter than the client's subconscious mind, which it's not. And it's like, so they thwart it.
Yeah.
They also give people, we have expectations. Like, you're
Yeah.
going to go do one ayahuasca ceremony and you're going to be healed of something.
Yeah.
No, this is deep.
Yeah.
And these studies that they're doing where, they have 3 high dose MDMA sessions. It's a study. It's research. It's not clinical work.
Yeah.
They're just trying to establish a sense that this medicine is useful therapeutically. They're not saying it only takes 3 sessions and you're healed. No, it takes more. And actually, I think a lower dose more frequently is the trick.
Yeah.
Because you're staying in a process, and you're getting it used to expressing itself, so that it gets used to healing, and then you get on a roll, and you get there a lot faster than if you're doing big dose sessions randomly.
Yeah.
But the terrain is our conscious mind, our unconscious mind, our subconscious programming. It's like the Buddhists came, like these Buddhist meditation masters that came over to the West, and they're trying to help train us to be in touch with our consciousness and understand it, how it works, because we are, as a culture, we focus externally.
Yeah.
So we needed help with that. There's a lot of teachings in the world, ancient teachings, that help us get in touch with the spiritual dimension of our reality. And, we need that. But there's also great stuff here in the West too. It's not all bad. There's a lot of great stuff. There's mystery schools that are Western based schools, and they're amazing. Jung, for example, his work was really about the dark night of the soul, and being able to map out the archetypical mythical realm of our subconscious, that right brain, dream space kind of place. And I just read a book that just came out this year that it sounds basically like the stuff we teach at Innate Path through a lens of Jung. It's amazing. It's a really good book. It's called Trauma in the Soul. And I don't remember the author off the top of my head, but it's actually free to listen to if you have Spotify Premium.
Oh, perfect.
So I highly recommend it. It's amazing.
We'll link it in the show notes so folks can find it.
Yeah, and I've come across other books that look at it from another lens, like, let's say, like through a lens of Shiva Tantra. There's an amazing book that basically is our work, and Innate Path is teaching through a Western lens, and we have to, because we're Western people. So we have to figure this out. And it's amazing that we're getting help, and it's like all of these different ancient schools, wisdoms seem to be coming to are like there to help us formulate this, because we need it as a whole world. Right. And anyway, we have everything we need to heal, and it's not about rejecting our own culture. It's about leveling up and insisting on getting out of this mess.
So what does that look like? So you're saying, like, we don't need more. We don't need to, like, uproot. We don't need to completely destroy. We have to level up.
Yeah. And it looks like, it's being forced down our throat.
Yeah.
Our the rates of children and adolescents with suicidal
I know.
impulses and follow through, that is so alarming. It's like, okay, we don't have a choice but to um go, what is going on?
But
Yeah.
that's my whole thing is like, I think it's so alarming too. That's why we did the podcast. But like, do you feel like it's like alarming to everyone? It like the school shootings, the suicide. I just saw something this weekend that like, men, I think ages 20 to 35, the suicide rates have gone skyrocketed in 10 years. Like, I don't know. I just like when you turn on the news and look on social media, and I know that's not, but that's a lot of people's way of engaging with the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's not concerned, like that. It's not there. And so my question is like, how do we, as like lay people,
Well, that's
do
go ahead.
something?
No. I mean, I also think sometimes the concern is there, and then a dissociative shutdown happens.
Yeah.
The other piece that happens, right? Like people feel disempowered, or
There's nothing we can do.
There's nothing we can do. I have no power in this. I'm so overwhelmed. So I'm gonna,
Yeah.
But and I think there are people who are not alarmed or not disturbed.
I think you're
Yeah.
pointing right to it, which is that we feel powerless.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's
Yeah.
the whole thing.
Mhm.
That's the cascade
Mhm.
of a loss of agency.
Yeah.
That's a deeply rooted feeling of powerlessness in one system, and that is the school system. You're powerless to do anything but conform.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't believe what these kids get put through if they don't conform.
Mhm.
And the parents too. The parents are bullied into
Mhm.
conforming and
Mhm.
forcing things on their children. I mean, it's just yeah. So what do you do when the whole culture is succumbing
Yeah.
to a feeling of powerlessness and dissociation, and they're just watching their own children be taken down?
Yeah.
That's where, as painful as it can be sometimes, that's where, I mean, this is why psychedelics got, and this is where I get a little, punchy.
Yeah.
But this is why psychedelics are suppressed,
Mhm.
Yeah.
because they bring it to the surface,
Mhm.
and we feel the symptoms,
Yeah.
and we begin to heal from them.
Yeah.
And when we heal from those symptoms, we will resist
Yeah.
all of these things.
Yeah.
We won't stand for it.
Yeah.
We will know that
Yeah.
does not serve us. And so as soon as we start healing enough, it's not going to float anymore.
Yeah.
And the trick to the powerlessness is don't try to force power to override your feeling of powerlessness. That's where we get into a lot of trouble, because basically all we're doing is like an uncontrolled force of energy pushing through powerlessness. It's still powerless.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's still coming from the same space, right?
Mhm.
Which a lot of our current, I would argue, leadership in this country that's exactly what they're doing, would be my argument.
Mhm.
And one thing you said in the training that's always stuck out with me is like, that's when things get dicey in like psychedelic communities or like guru stuff, right? Is like that piece.
Yeah. It because we don't recognize it.
Yeah.
We think that we're trying to get better.
Yeah.
Gain more power.
Yeah.
By overcoming our weaknesses, by overcoming our powerlessness. And especially when you're getting some status for it. and this is where like the psychedelic community, you get status for your psychedelic work, but you haven't understood that you actually have to face your powerlessness. And the more you heal, the safer you internally become, and therefore the closer you get to your core wounds. So in a certain way, we're getting stronger, more resilient as we heal, but we're also getting closer to the hardest stuff.
Right.
So in our world, we think of progress as like this line going up, but in the real world, progress is a spiral, and or almost like the hero's journey, where you're constantly going back into the underworld, into the unconscious, fighting the harder bosses, the harder monsters, until you have victory. And the victory is getting back to yourself, that wholeness. So the victory is you've brought in enough wholeness that you just have natural power. When we have natural power and wholeness, we do not put up with that shit. It's like, and that's happening. That's happening, and that's why psychedelics have been suppressed, and that's why they say they're dangerous. They are not dangerous at all. What we perceive as danger is the expression of our unconscious that holds monsters that were placed there in childhood. That's it. And we're not children anymore. So there's really nothing scary about it. It doesn't mean that people can't have psychotic breaks, because that's also a memory from childhood. Think about it. I mean, some people were in positions in childhood that were so scary, that's all they could do. So that's part of the memory that they're processing. And it sucks, but it's temporary. And on the other side, you're a whole lot less psychotic and afraid, and it's that kind of stuff. And it's hard, but we're doing it. We're doing it. And that's the whole thing. I mean, that's the whole point of the training with the community, is once you start down that path, it's also a cascade. And it's a cascade that goes deep within ourselves, and it spreads to each other as we are peer support, and it spreads to our community at large. And then people start doing wonderful things. And then pretty soon it becomes knowledge.
And you're right. Like, I'm not saying that I there's no summit in life, but it's what you're saying. Like, doing the training was just for me, like the tip of the iceberg, and exactly what you're saying. Like, I can't stand for this shit anymore, which is like why I'm doing the podcast and like have a louder voice. Like, it's exactly what you're saying. And it is, not like a power in a sense of control, but a power in the sense of like being more aligned with myself and like saying it to the world, right?
Yeah. I mean, you think a lion laying in the sun has a lot of latent or potential power. A human being has so much potential power. It is amazing how beat down we are.
But then simultaneously told that we're not. We're told that it's our fault. We're told that, it's
just work
one
hard.
thing. I mean, and it's interesting to be beat down and to know it, and it's a whole other thing to be beat down and convinced that you're not beat down, that you're actually
in
control, and that if something's not going right, then you are even more deeply flawed than you thought. I mean, that's pretty genius marketing right there.
For real.
It really is.
So
I mean, you just start undermining a sense of power through all kinds of mechanisms, especially in early childhood, like from 1 to 7. And you've got someone that will feel like it's life-threatening not to obey.
So really, I mean, it's kind of coming full circle to me that a lot of the unworthy inadequacy is like powerlessness.
It's powerlessness and devaluing and a horrible sense of aloneness,
Yeah.
like a unbearable sense of aloneness that comes from not being held unconditionally in your by caregivers in the community.
Mm-hmm. And that's what you're saying, like when it comes back to conform and be accepted.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
The pressure is outrageous. You can't even blame anybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so painful. Yeah, but it's healable. And
100%.
that's the thing. It's healable because it's all right there and it's ready for you to lean into it. Yeah, it holds the deepest fear of a baby who feels forsaken. Yeah, it doesn't get worse than that. But like, you can feel it as an adult.
Yeah. And I think that's the piece, like, so much that I like just resonated so much with the training and still do. It's like, you don't have to go fucking like do all these things. Like, your healing is like right here. It's in this chair. It's developing your agency. Like, that's it, right? It's not this constant, like, go do this, figure this out, achieve this. It's like all right here, right? And it's just so I mean, we talk about this in Innate Path, but like, how we don't have as big of a voice as like some of the other programs that are like marketing bullshit. No offense to those programs, but like, it's not sexy to say like, oh, everything's right here, right?
Yeah.
Like,
it's
like,
it's hard to sell.
Yeah.
Plus, what I mean, you don't want to market it because it will grow of its own power.
Yeah.
It too is that same organic kind of thing where when we figure out that everything we need to know how to be an amazing therapist comes from our experience within and our own healing. Once you figure that out, and then once you like start working with your friends, you know, to support each other in that in your community, and everybody's getting on board, and you know, then all of a sudden your voice gets bigger. So I think our voice is probably going to get bigger.
Yeah.
Just from that. Just from that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And another piece that's standing out to me is how big the community piece is, and like having people around you that accept you no matter what, unconditionally. So can you just talk a little bit about community? And I guess my question really is I think there's a lot of like bullshit about what community is. Like, it's almost like a sales pitch these days. I don't know if you guys relate to that, but like, what is real, true community?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a question that I had going in to the making the clinic, and some attempt to create community there. And then, you know, it's been a learning curve for me, but, my personal belief is that we have a developmental bonding window in infancy with our caretakers, and then we have a bonding window in adolescence with our community, and that's when our community accepts us as the person we've become, you know, unconditionally. Can't get kicked out. And that doesn't happen.
Right.
You know, we don't even have adequate rites of passage. In our world. And so it's like we have a mythical, developmental, archetypical, whatever you want to call it, need to be initiated into our community, and that doesn't happen for many people. I mean, some people get it really well through sports, I think. There's a few ways that it happens for people, but typically it does not happen. And so you have a conditional, unbonded relationship to your community. And so, you know, you can say, oh, let's all be nice to each other, and you know, like, make sure that we talk with respect and nonviolent communication and all that stuff, but it doesn't address the actual wound that's taking place. And if you don't, you're not acknowledging, nor are you resolving how deeply threatening being in a community is for people. So to heal it, we have to be aware of that, be not only aware of it, but like celebrate when it emerges. Like we had one group, it was, I don't know if you were in this group, but one person, this happens in every single group, but this one was particularly amazing, where somebody had really gotten upset with one of the therapists holding a session for them, and they thought for sure now that they were mean to the therapist they were going to get kicked out of the group forever. They were terrified, and they waited till the very last moment of the class to say anything, and they're talking about it, and it's just heartbreaking. To hear how scared they were. But at the same time, I'm just smiling like so big because they just broke the ice for everybody. And when they were done talking, everybody was just like, yes, we all feel this way.
Wow.
It's like we're all trying to jump through hoops to mediate our relationship in a group.
Yeah.
100%. And everybody's got their own style, and everybody's got their own wounds. But if you're in a community that celebrates when you're triggered and sees it as a beautiful opportunity and has compassion for you as you work through that trigger, and it only makes you closer, that's a community that can heal. That's what I figured out so far.
Yeah. Totally.
Wow. I love that.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense.
Well, one thing that we are going to be focusing on in 2025 is this kind of wrap-up question for our interviews. And the question, and jump in, Hannah, here if I miss anything, is what have you been told about what makes a happy life or a good life that as an adult or in your journey you've learned is actually not true or doesn't actually bring happiness?
Well, I actually, I come from like a family that I spent most of my childhood in nature. I'm not a city person, and my family, I'm very grateful to have had this experience, but we spent most of our time in the woods, and had a very humble sense of what happiness was. Like happiness is getting a big fish. Happiness is getting a deer at deer camp, happiness is getting to go mushroom hunting, and that's how I thought about it. So, I know I'm happiest when I'm doing those kinds of things. So, but what I thought, my own distorted thinking later on in life that told me I could be happy if I such and such was I could be happy if I achieved a lot in my life. Accomplished a lot. That seemed to be my a voice in the back of my head. And it ran me ragged. And I got really bad burnout after we closed the clinic. Really bad burnout. But yeah, I'm realizing even I don't need to achieve anything to be worth something.
Jen, thank you so much. This has been such a cool conversation that I just appreciate you for doing this. And I just love hearing you talk. Like, it's mesmerizing to me. Just, it all clicks.
Yes, agreed. Thank you.
So I know that will shine through on the interview. An innate path is cool because you don't have to be a therapist to do the training, right? Like anyone who's interested in psychedelics can do the training.
Yeah.
And it sounds like there's a training coming up. We'll have this episode out before that. So there's a training coming up in February.
Yeah, there's a training in February, starting the end of the first week of February, and it runs for 10 weeks. And we do have a few spots open. And it's a small group. It's cozy, and it's a really worthy good time.
It's one of the best things I've ever done, for real. So we'll link that in the show notes so you can get more info on the training and Innate Path and who we are. There's a ton of really cool people in the community. So
just to clarify, when you say who we are, that's because you teach for Innate Path. Is that correct?
Well, I just think we're
Yes.
yes. And just like our community of folks.
Yeah.
Like, we're just cool ass people.
It's amazing. It's like we don't market really or anything, and we just attract these people. And every day after the first day of the training, I'm always like, holy shit, what a cool group. Yeah, we just attract people that this is their calling.
Yeah.
It's a calling. It's a magnetism.
Yeah.
And so they end up coming to us, and it's great and it's fun. And Hannah's one of the instructors in the training now. And when she said that it's open to anyone in the community, we mean that, because it's, being a therapist isn't the answer to our healing. It's shifting the way in which we are in community together as a whole. And so we will accept people who are teachers, doctors, nurses, body workers, dancers, musicians.
Cool.
We really do welcome everybody.
Amazing.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. That's fun.
You've been listening to Are We Happy Yet? A Green Roof Studios production. This episode was recorded and produced by Hannah Buzzo and Jane Thatcher Hahn.
If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love for you to rate, review, subscribe, and share it with someone you care about. Your support helps us reach more listeners. And for every rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we're donating to a charity connected to one of our guests. Check the show notes for more details on this month's featured charity.
Thanks for listening. See you next time.